Support for this broadcast comes from
The Michigan Historic Preservation Network is a nonprofit organization dedicated to connecting our past with the present and linking us to the future. Together, we can save spaces.
with additional support from Constellation Films, creating motion pictures, films, and videos since 1991.
Preservation in America has become a hot topic, from farmers and rural townspeople to big city folk and everyone in between. The preservation movement has touched us all, but at no time historically has preservation been more mainstream than it is today. The development of land and the American personal right to do as we please and to make a profit have clashed. But what does it all mean? To each person, whether trying to save a building, preserve a cemetery or battlefield, maintain a community's character, or develop an open space, the notion of preservation has a different perspective to us all.
Well, we're a society that's changing so fast that we let many valuable things go by without even pausing to think about it.
Once they're gone, you can't really get them back. Once you've built up on all the land, it's hard to have it revert back to nature. Anything like that would take at least a lifetime to bring back, and you won't see it, and your children may never see it.
It's happening here in Michigan and more throughout the U.S. Preservationists now recognize the advantages of working with developers, and together they are creating unique projects which meet the goals of both factions, making a profit while preserving history. But for one farmer, Don Stabler, it has become a race against time. His farm is on the edge of development in a rapidly changing area just outside Ann Arbor, Michigan. This is Don's dilemma.
Well, this farm was purchased by my family in 1912. I was a year and a half old when we moved here. Been here now 85 years.
In historic preservation, we're concerned with managing that change. We're not trying to fossilize the past in any sense, but to monitor change in a way that preserves the sense of place in communities, in localities and regions.
It's America. This is what we think of when we think of our country and our roots often, is this open space and freedom, and everybody has this desire to own their little piece of land and farm. Unfortunately, to do that, we will gobble up all the farms and there'll be no open space left because our population is continuing to grow and the demand for housing and that piece of 40 acres or a quarter of an acre that comes now with a house is in great demand.
It has been a good farm, but no longer is big enough to make profit. It is way too small. This road out here was a dirt road, sandy track when we moved here until 1925 when it was paved, and I see people day after day in the summertime and the fall time stopping their cars out here along the road and snapping pictures of the pond and the woods. It's beautiful over there, especially in the fall. They like to see the cows. This is the last herd of cattle between Ann Arbor and Detroit. They stop, walk over to the fence, look at the cows. There aren't any more. We got to go to a zoo to find them.
Don's situation is typical of what's happening across America. His property is worth thousands of dollars more to developers than farmers.
When we sit in this 100-plus-year-old farmhouse and we look at what's going on immediately around us, different developers always wanting to secure this parcel or that parcel with views or access to the water, and always at a value that you really have to sit up and take notice. It becomes a real race.
The traffic is tremendous. We now have a morning and evening rush hour, just like you have downtown. I can't even walk across the road. And across the back of the farm now is M14, a freeway, which I can hear night and day. Now, these are the things that have happened, and there's no stopping it, of course.
I think there will always be developers, and there's going to be more developers because there's lots of money in development. I think this is an opportunity for the preservation movement to sit down and work with those folks. I don't think you're going to stop development. I think the most we can probably hope to do at this moment is to educate developers and to ensure that developments that do occur are sensitive to the environment and the historic character of the area.
I still hate to see all of these farms disappear. I've seen all of this stuff happen since 1912. This has been going on, and it's getting worse and worse as far as having any open space is concerned.
Development used to be an emotional clash of ideals, an us versus them philosophy, with progress up against history. There were seldom any real winners.
What we do is we go in, we look for the easiest or the most saleable piece of property. We buy it up, we divide it up into these lots with rigid boundary lines, and then we lay out roads that create these cul-de-sacs that end at one subdivision, and there's no continuity to the next, so you're constantly retracing your steps. And we don't look at the overall picture. We look at bits and pieces as townships, counties, states, and nationally.
With the next millennium upon us, the situation remains constant, a dilemma over what will happen to the ever-shrinking countryside. To save or not to save.
It's a toss-up. You've got those that want to, and you've got those that say, I want my cash. And that's when we have to start to look at conservation easements and some of the importance of why you want to save. What is the advantage? What is the advantage to the farmer to not sell out and go to Florida?
Each year in America, thousands of farm acres are lost to development. This was never a problem before. Farmers could always move somewhere else. But now, there just simply aren't any more somewhere else's.
I'd love to see it stay as a farm or as an open space or park or whatever. Of course, I won't be around to see that, and practically none of my family will either. They're scattered all over the country. There's none around here. So the alternative is just seeing a subdivision grow here, and there's demand for it. I am fighting off some realtors who want to list it.
While you very much value the democratic aspects of our society, it's almost annoying knowing that folks are willing to undercut a program to pad their own pocketbooks. And yet that's really what historically we've always been operating on as a country.
I would like to see it stay as farm, and of course my next door neighbor, he would like to have it to add to his, so that would be fine. But the price that he can pay for land to raise crops on cannot compare with what a developer can do. So that's the dilemma we're in.
Most people are not going to say, I just want to save it like this for the heck of it.
And when that surrounding landscape disappears and is replaced with something else, it diminishes the building. It loses some of its significance.
It will go if something isn't done for developmental purposes. We are now completely surrounded by houses, and this one will go too, if something doesn't happen.
So what should happen? The answer is not difficult.
If it's one thing I've learned in my 25 years in preservation is that your adversaries can become your greatest allies, but not if you don't talk to them.
And my way of thinking that if the public is interested in seeing my scenic acres here or whatever, and wants to keep this as a farm, they're going to have to realize that somebody's going to have to pay for it. And this is going to have to be taxpayers' money that's going to have to do this sort of thing. If they can afford to do so, so good. If not, the consequences are just simply like I have all the way around me. It'll grow a crop of houses instead of a crop of alfalfa.
It's a puzzle. We are but one of the pieces. And if you're looking at making the puzzle whole, you necessarily have to involve those other players, including the developers, including the nonprofit organizations, including the landowners.
This is happening too often. A farm that's across the road there disappeared just last year, and that's going to be building houses. That was a beautiful 160-acre farm originally. It's gone.
Innovative ideas are replacing conflict with alternatives. Walter Johnson's story is surprisingly similar to Farmer Don's. But here in Peninsula Township, Michigan, the outcome could be different.
I like to hear the birds sing and hear the frogs in the spring, and you hear all the sounds of nature. You could hear the cicadas, humming in the month of June, as it started to warm up. And it just seemed like it was so much more desirable then compared to now, as far as I'm concerned.
And concern is just what prompted people like Walter into action. They too were faced with a rapidly changing landscape.
Well, everybody's got something that's unique or special, whether Peninsula Township is no different than any other place in the country or the world for that matter. Everybody's got something special. And all we did was try to identify what that was and then figure out how we wanted to protect it.
I started out plowing with horses. I had a team and a one-bottom plow that I started with, and went through all the agonies of learning how to plow. Learning from my dad, and being thrown over the handlebars a couple of times, and I just had a natural traction feel for the soil. Like my dad always said, I like to see things grow.
Planners are listening to communities, and together they are using new zoning techniques such as higher density cluster developments to offset preservation of open spaces.
In August of 1994, the voters in Peninsula Township voted property tax millage to buy development rights on farmland.
I think that Peninsula Township has a long history of wanting to preserve its rural heritage and has always, since the time I've been a participant in planning and zoning, which is about 15 years, been concerned about agriculture and trying to make zoning compatible with agriculture and compatible with farmers.
Well, having grown up here and lived right here all my life, I'm used to seeing these orchards and all of these open areas here, and I sort of like to keep it that way if I can.
Since 1976, purchase of development rights, along with other community-driven ideas, have been successful throughout the U.S.
It's working because one of the big pressures on farmers to ultimately sell their land off for development is the expanding pressures of suburbanization and the fact that they can make a lot of money when they're ready to retire. This way they get the money ahead of time and they can go on farming.
Early in some of the survey work that we did with our residents and property owners, the concept that we probably would have to pay somebody if we were actually going to preserve things as opposed to regulate them through a zoning ordinance. And this township in particular had been very judicious in administering their zoning ordinance. That was before I got here, so I can say that, but they had done a good job. They did not rezone except under very careful situations in conformance with their plan. And they were still seeing the same kinds of problems of managing the growth that was coming.
It appears to be consumed, by people wanting to move and getting out of congested areas. Congestion really occurs because you don't really have it planned.
And so really what we started was a growth management plan to begin with. And part of that growth management plan is preserving our farmland through purchase of development rights.
My younger son has a farm in the P.D.R. program. In fact, he was the very first to sign up.
But that's not the only program, and I don't think anybody should expect purchasing development rights to be the only thing. What it did for us was that it allowed an industry to survive so that some of the other techniques of clustering and transferring development rights and moving houses into proper locations and providing sewer and water and all those things would make sense because we had preserved that critical mass of farmland and township character that made all the other things worthwhile and work. So we used it as kind of a key to our overall growth management strategy.
We didn't come up with transfer of development rights. We're just following some leadership that we see in other states. Pennsylvania is really progressive in that regard.
It's a growth management plan, and we're trying to manage the change that's taking place in our township. But it's not a no-growth plan, and I think that's probably why we've got a lot of support from the development community, real estate people, and other people that you might think would be opposed to some kind of controls over growth or managing growth, and we've had them on our side, which is kind of nice.
I don't think that you can stop development in our country, and I don't think you'd really want to try. I think it's a futile effort, and I think it's counterproductive.
It's interesting because you suddenly see preservationists talking to folks from the Trust for Public Land, or the American Farmland Trust, or the Nature Conservancy, or any of the community development organizations, neighborhood organizations. So I think it is a harbinger of what's to come. That's one reason why I want to be right there at the front of that in terms of educating students. That's why I want to talk to Gordon Hayward, who is looked at around the nation as a leader in P.D.Rs and T.D.Rs. I want people to begin to understand that this is an aspect. All these other organizations that are working nationwide to preserve places, this is an aspect of preservation that we really need to embrace.
If the members of that community can get their arms around it, I think that it's really important to pull the community in and determine the values of that community and use those values when you create the tools for that sort of preservation.
We developed a geographic information system simply to use as a communication tool so that we could have specific data which was reliable and acceptable.
I think also part of the key to preserving rural open spaces is to making our urban spaces more livable places for people so that we can work and make our suburbs and urban areas more attractive, residential areas, and keeping areas further afield open.
The farm right across the road must be some 50 acres in there, and it has real estate signs around it, and they have to sell, of course, in 5 or 10 acre parcels, and that's the way he's doing it. And I prefer, not to go that route.
Preservationists are realizing you have to preserve an entire area or section in order to really be able to understand what happened in that particular place.
The other thing that we did was we kept our easements very simple. We said to the farmer, we're going to pay you not to plant houses on these farm acres. And that's essentially it. They can do almost anything else that any other farmer can do. But we made the review process fairly simple so that it's easy for me as a zoning administrator to say, no, I'm not going to issue a land use permit for that house because that's deed restricted property. You don't have the right to do that anymore.
Just like our farm, and our home farm, I call it our home farm, is 80 acres, and there'll never be a house built on it. Now that's rare. That's no houses per 80 acres.
We talked to the newspaper people, we talked to television people, anybody that would listen, public groups. We always had something going on that was important to the community, and so it was listening, talking, communicating, and really listening, not just holding a public hearing and then ignoring what was said.
I think that it's worth the struggle to try to save agricultural land. I think that on a larger scale it's really important for our country to look at the preservation of agricultural land. You know, right now we don't need such a huge agricultural basis because we can feed ourselves, but sometime we may not be able to. And we're growing more people all the time, we're not growing more land.
The future looks promising for people working together.
Preservation is heading for a collision course with the environmental and conservation movements, particularly as we begin to look at the entire landscape, cultural landscapes, very analogous to what environmentalists are looking at when they talk about biodiversity and ecosystems. And so I see the two movements getting closer and closer together and becoming stronger allies.
I think it looks very good, but it's mostly going to come, I think, from local initiative. We're not in a period where we can expect the same amount of help from the governments that we have in the past, but it's a growing concern to preserve buildings, to preserve open spaces, and I think conservationists and preservationists, as the future goes on, are increasingly going to be collaborating.
If some foundation felt it would be a worthy cause to preserve a farm in a subdivision, why maybe such a thing could happen, and just simply buy up the development rights that go into a conservation easement, and that farm would stay there just like it is.
We have to work on the state legislature to get money appropriated to do these things. That is, purchase the development rights to stop this from getting away, and to make sure that the farmer gets a fair return, like everybody else does, on what he's invested in all his life. It's going to take a lot of money. And the legislature has got to see that this is appropriated, and that means everybody's taxes are going to have to go up to pay for this sort of thing if we want to keep it.
I believe that America is sidetracked. I think that there could be consideration given to having certain spaces left untouched.
It needs to be implemented from the citizens up. It should not be a government down type of situation. That's what's made this program successful.
I believe you don't have to get people to participate, you simply have to allow them, invite them, say, you're important, we want to listen to what you got to say, you know just as much as we do.
And to me, I am saving something for future generations. As the Indians wanted to save for the 7th generation, that's what I feel we need to be doing.
Purchase of development rights is working here, and I think it can work in any community.
People want to help, they want to participate, they know what they want. All we got to do is listen.
Open communication and community involvement are the keys to preserving open spaces in America.
It's never too late. You know, you may not win this battle, but if you put up the good fight, you'll be that much more prepared to win the next battle.
I think it's important, but there's a lot of education that's got to be done.
Support for this broadcast comes from
The Michigan Historic Preservation Network is a nonprofit organization dedicated to connecting our past with the present and linking us to the future. Together, we can save spaces.
with additional support from Constellation Films, creating motion pictures, films, and videos since 1991. For a VHS copy of this episode of PreserVision, send $24.95 to Constellation Films or call 1-800-358-1967.